Hey, this is Vince Giordano with the Juniata County Library, and I have a special guest with us today, a local author to Juniata County, Julie Doherty. And hey, Julie, how you doing?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm doing well, considering everything.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I first met Julie through our local Rotary chapter, and she shared on a presentation then about her writings, and then I started seeing things around in Mifflintown with her books, and I was like, tell me more. So I, wanted to get in touch with Julie and have you on here and hear about your writing, hear about you and your background, and kind of how COVID's going with all this. So I guess just share your background. What
Okay.
about yourself.
Okay. Um, as you know, we had our book signing planned for, what was it, late March, mid-March, and that got canceled. So I had a presentation sort of already put together, and it did include a little bit about my background. So I thought I would just go ahead and run part of that PowerPoint presentation, if that's okay.
Go for it. Sure.
Okay. Now, give me a second here. You know I'm not the best at this. Alrighty. Can you see? Is that showing up okay?
Yes, it is. Perfectly.
Okay. So I am a native Juniata Countian. I grew up along the Cocalamus Creek, not too far from the Dimmsville Bridge, which sadly is no longer there. My parents owned and operated Heartland Gallery in Thompsontown, where my mom sold my dad's art for many, many years. And I think what makes my dad's art so popular, even today, years after his death, is his paintings invoke a sense of nostalgia. They freeze moments in time and they preserve our heritage. Dad he loved talking about our ancestry and where we came from as a family. And so when I was a girl, our home was filled with stories about our ancestors. Some of them pretty specific and others more general, like we were Scots-Irish or that our family had manufactured gunpowder for the American Revolution. So, pardon me, when records started to become digitized and information was more readily available on the internet, I decided to fact check the family legends. And interestingly, I found out that most of them were true. What I didn't expect was that I fell down the genealogy rabbit hole and I landed in a world of stories, not all of them about my family. I came across ads for runaway servants, death notices for really weird farm accidents and even cooking accidents. Like there was one involving a 2-year-old child who fell into a cauldron of boiling apple butter near present-day Seven Stars and died 2 days later. I read letters from the frontier, petitions from frantic settlers, people desperate enough to load their dead onto wagons and take them from our area to Philadelphia in an effort to convince the pacifist government that they needed assistance. I devoured firsthand accounts of captivity. I found stories of settlers who, some of those stories were incredibly brutal and others were less so. And I even came across stories of captured settlers who refused to return to their families when they were rescued. They liked their new lives. And I also found stories of women of high birth who ran away with so-called ne'er-do-wells, never to be seen again. My own ancestors, all of these stories sort of sharpened my need to learn about my own ancestors. And like so many others, they simply dropped into what is now Juniata County in the mid-1700s. And I couldn't stop thinking about them, and I couldn't help wondering how on earth they got from Ireland to a one-room cabin near 7 stars. Well, the search led me to Ireland and surprisingly then on to Scotland, where I encountered this man, Somerled of Argyll. Somerled lies at the head of many, many family trees, and including mine. And I don't know if this still holds true, but at one time he was the world's second most common ancestor, bested only by Genghis Khan. He was a 12th century warlord, half Viking and half Royal Irish, and he went from living in a cave in exile to seizing control of the Kingdom of the Isles. At a time when ships had a single oar on the side of the vessel, Somerled invented a movable stern rudder. And he added this invention to another of his inventions, which was the Berlin. This was a smaller vessel. It was easier to maneuver than the larger ships of the day. And with that movable rudder at the stern and the smaller size, he was able to outmaneuver the Viking longships that were harassing his ancestral lands. This gave him an incredible advantage in battle, and it led to his political prominence in Scotland, Ireland, and the Isle of Man. I was fascinated by his rise from obscurity and enthralled by his ingenuity. And at this point, Vince, you may be thinking, hey, Jules, are you developing a crush on this guy or what? And the answer to that is yes. He was a fascinating guy. I mean, everything about his life suggested that he was extremely intelligent. He was logical. He was a man of common sense until the end. And then it didn't make sense to me. Why would a man pushing 70 years of age sail an enormous fleet up the River Clyde in an attempt to take the Scottish crown? Now, we know that it was quite a complicated matter, but the romantic in me, having this crush on Somerled of Argyll, wondered, what if it was for the love of a woman? And that's how Son of the Soul was born. Paranormals were really hot at the time, so I did include a supernatural thread that explains or attempts to explain Somerled's innovative nature. It's not a book for the faint of heart. And even after 5 years after it released, it remains a book that readers either love or hate. Reviews are simply all over the place on this one. From well-told love story full of colorful descriptions and dark demons, to I didn't like the middle towards the ending, to a wonderful blend of history, mysticism, and love, to the ending is pretty awful. I hated the whole book. And my personal favorite, utter bleep, but I still cried at the end. And this is actually my absolute favorite review of all time. She gave it 3 stars, and she felt very strongly about the book. And for me as a writer, that's a success. That's what I want as a writer. I want to make you feel. I want readers to feel something. You may not always like what I make you feel, but you're going to feel something. And I think I succeeded in that case. Son of the Soul served as a jumping off point for a 3-book series. This one, as I said, contains a paranormal thread. And then each of the 3 books, while it is a series, each of the 3 books stands alone and can be read on its own. You don't have to read all 3 to understand what's happening. The second book in the series is called Scattered Seeds. This book contains no paranormal elements whatsoever. While Son of the Soul takes place in 12th century Scotland and Ireland, Scattered Seeds moves us from Ireland to Pennsylvania in the 18th century, and specifically our area here. And then the third book in the series is The Scent of Forever, which starts out, this wraps up the series, and it starts out in present day 7 stars and takes us to Scotland. So these are the 3 books that sort of launched my writing career and brought me to where I am today.
A couple of questions I thought of while you were talking through this. How seriously do you take the reviews that you see online?
Oh, Vince, my first review was actually not bad. It was 3 stars. But it was kind of a negative within a positive. Well, actually, that's not true. My first review was a 5-star, and that was great. And I thought, oh, this is going to be so good. And then my first 3-star came in. I thought, what do you mean you didn't love my book? You know, and in the middle of a positive review, there was a negative comment. I think the reader had said that the whole premise was lame. And I was not emotionally prepared for someone to call my premise lame, you know, and honestly, I just started crying, and I took it so seriously. I took it so personally. But, you know, they say you have to have a thick skin to be an author, and you really do, because I can take my favorite book and I can go to Amazon and look at the reviews, and it might be a book that, seriously, like, I love this book hands down, and I go to Amazon and somebody is just, lots of people have hated it. You know, that's just the nature of art. Some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it. It doesn't make, for someone to give my book a 1-star does not mean that it's a bad book. It just means that person, it wasn't their taste. They didn't like it. And that's the way art should be, you know? And it took me a while to appreciate that. It took me a while to appreciate that reviews are not for me. Reviews are for readers to share with other readers what they liked, what they didn't like. And so it took a while, but I love reviews, and if somebody wants to give me a bad review, give me a bad review. I can learn something, you know. I don't know it all.
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about reviews much until you kind of brought this up. I personally, when I want to watch a movie or a TV show, I go and look at the reviews, but it's really hard to, you know, take an entire book or something and whittle it down to a few stars and half stars.
It is.
And everything.
It is. Well, and every book has something that you're going to like and something you may not like, you know. It's probably a rare book that you're just going to love from start to finish. There's usually something in there you may not like, but same with movies, you know. And they do matter. Reviews do matter, especially today. But they help keep a book visible on Amazon. So, and it's hard to get reviews. People are so busy, you know. It's hard to get them.
Yeah, it seems like, I don't know, like maybe if you really love something or you really hate something, it's like those are the people that might review things.
Yeah.
So when I'm looking for a product, like I often go and look at the 3-star reviews or kind of, you know, things that might show a balance and not just an extreme.
Yeah.
I guess it helps on Amazon when you say that it shows, like, if it's a verified purchase, so you know it's somebody who actually purchased it in some format.
Right.
So yeah, I guess you have Amazon, and then you check like Goodreads and Barnes and Noble and other places.
Yeah.
Who designed your book covers?
I cannot remember their names. That's terrible, because it's all done rather anonymously through the publishing company. I can't remember their names. But what happens is when you submit a manuscript to your publisher, and if the publisher accepts the manuscript, the next thing that happens is they'll send out to you a cover art form that lists a bunch of questions about your characters, what your vision is for them, you know, what they look like, what color their eyes are, what time period, what the steam level is of the novel. And then that form gets sent off to a cover artist, and they want your blurb as well, the back cover copy. And then the cover artist just comes up with their own vision and sends it back for approval.
So I assume you could say, you know, have a half-naked man on the front cover, or
Well,
somebody
I mean,
holding
you
a
can
gun?
see the cover does sell the book. It's the first thing people are going to see. So if you look at my book covers, they're all very different. And Scattered Seeds had 3 covers before we went with this one, and we still weren't entirely satisfied with it because there just aren't a lot of stock images out there for the 18th century, stories set in the 18th century. Most of them are military, and in fact, the guy on the cover of that novel, I think, is wearing military garb. They had to change the color of his jacket and do some, or his coat, and do some other things. But that book started out with, it's a story of a father-son duo who emigrate from Ireland to Pennsylvania, and it's more of an adventure really than a romance. There is a subplot of a romance, but it's really an overcoming the odds kind of story. And so when the cover came in, it's been marketed as historical romance. So when the cover came in, the publisher had put a picture of a young girl in front of a waterfall with her head thrown out, like thrown back, like they were gearing up for romance. And I said, I think readers are going to be really disappointed if they buy the book based upon the cover, expecting there to be some kind of, deep romance, because that's not really what's going on here. And so they sent me the next cover, and it looked like a church bulletin, because it was these hands that were holding sort of ears of wheat in the hands. And I thought, okay, I'm expecting to open this up and there's like a whole program on the parable of the wheat. It really just looked like a church bulletin. So by this time, I think they were getting kind of frustrated with me, and they said, well, send us what your ideas are. And I went looking for images, and I saw what the difficulty was, because there aren't a lot of 18th century stock images out there. But that's, they send it to you in draft, you get to look and approve, and if it's okay, then you just say okay.
So am I correct in assuming that like certain covers might cost more money or less money, like depending on how complicated they are?
That I don't know. I don't have anything to do with cost. My publisher takes care of all of that. I never see an invoice. They just send me the cover art form, and then I think they subcontract it out to artists.
Okay. I feel kind of silly not to know a lot of these things as a librarian.
No, most people don't. Most people don't.
Yeah. So tell us about your latest book then.
That's A Valley Too Far. And they say that writers should write at least one book for themselves. This is my book. That is the book for me. If I went into a bookstore and I was searching for the perfect book for Julie Doherty, it would be A Valley Too Far. When I was researching Scattered Seeds, I fell completely in love with our local history. And I knew that I wanted to set another book in the same time period, specifically one set to the tragic events of 1756 in the Tuscarora Valley. And that picture, I just have to draw your attention to these photographs that I'm using here. I have a friend, I know, but they're so good, and God bless reenactors, because these are reenactors. And I have a friend, Charlie Berry. He's a policeman in southern Pennsylvania, and he might even be in Baltimore. But he's a reenactor, and he goes to these living history events, and he takes these wonderful, wonderful photographs, and he allowed me to use them. I'm so grateful. But yeah, so I wanted to write a book set in the Tuscarora Valley. And, there's a sign near Rudders. I'm sure you've seen it. I'm sure the people watching this have seen it. Thousands of us drive by this sign every single day. And I often wonder how many people actually stop to read it. And if they do they really know what happened here? I mean, the sign looks pretty mild, you know. It says that there was a fort and it was destroyed in 1756 by the Indians. What it doesn't tell you is that there were 22 people inside at the time, most of them women and children. On the day that Fort Bingham was destroyed, John Gray and Francis Innes were coming back from Carlisle, where they had gone for supplies. And somewhere on the Tuscarora Mountain, a bear spooked John's horse and scattered his supplies all over the mountain. So John says to Francis, you know, you go on ahead, because both men were really, really worried about their families, which they had left in Fort Bingham for safekeeping. And so Francis did, and I can almost imagine John's fury as he, you know, cursing that bear under his breath as he gathered up his supplies, maybe salt, gunpowder, perhaps even a little trinket that he had picked up for his little daughter. But 2 hours later, when he made it to Fort Bingham and found it in ruin, he probably realized that the bear actually saved his life, because Francis Innes was gone along with his family. Some people had burned up in the fort. Others, everyone else was missing, including John's wife and his daughter. And there was a woman that was outside the stockade. And the colonial records say that she was great with child, so she was heavily pregnant and probably too slow and too ungainly to march towards Kittanning. So the records say that she was killed and mangled in a shocking manner. Now, of course, we know who did this, and it would be tempting to despise them for it. But to understand their motives means digging in to understand their own perilous situation in 1756. The Iroquois defeated the Delawares in a distant battle, and after that battle, they continued to allow the Delawares and the Shawnee to hunt and live in present-day Juniata County. But when the European settlers started coming to Pennsylvania in droves, the Iroquois decided to sell lands. And of course, they're not going to sell lands that they're using. That would be stupid, right? So they decide to sell the lands that these conquered tribes were using. And every time they did that, it pushed the Delaware and the Shawnee even farther west. They couldn't return east. The Delaware and the Shawnee could not return east because those lands were now occupied by the European settlers, and they couldn't go farther west because those lands were occupied by hostile tribes. So they were essentially stuck in the middle, pinched between two worlds, if you will, growing more desperate and falling into illness, starvation, and unfortunately alcoholism. So when the French defeated the British at present-day Pittsburgh, it emboldened the Delaware and Shawnee. They took up the hatchet against the people that they felt were responsible for taking their lands, and they did it with unbridled ferocity. The settlers living in the Tuscarora Valley were essentially defenseless because the government would not send aid. The government at the time was made up mostly of pacifist Quakers, and they were living in the safe zones around Philadelphia. This was not happening to them. This was happening to those people way far away. It didn't really concern them. So the settlers were essentially defenseless here. Some of them took it upon themselves to create what are called blockhouses. These were often two-story buildings with the second story overshooting the first so that people could fire down upon anyone attacking the building. They sometimes had a stockade around the outside and sometimes not. And in times of trouble, entire communities will crowd into these windowless huts. And these are the circumstances that set the stage for A Valley Too Far. Katrina Davis is a widow. She's forced to live in the Tuscarora Valley with her adult daughter and family. We have to remember that in the 18th century, women didn't have many rights. Widows had almost none. So as men are moving off the frontier, Katrina's son-in-law refuses to do so. He's this close to reaching that American dream. He's poised to make a fortune on superior German horses. And he believes that his Quaker roots will ensure that no harm will come to the family, because his family has always had a really good relationship with the Native Americans. But on a quiet night in June, as the family settles down for the night, and the frogs and the crickets start their nightly chorus, a horse screams. And off we go to A Valley Too Far.
I'm hooked. I want to read it.
You know, it's a good book, and on its face, it's a story about a mother who will just do anything to cross the dangerous frontier to retrieve her family. A mother will go to any lengths for her young, and Katrina's no different. So that's what it's about on its face. But on a deeper level, it's really about crossing the valleys between us, abandoning the prejudices and yielding to love.
So how did you choose to write, or why did you choose to write in these time periods and in these locations geographically?
Well, you know, as a Christian woman, of course, I know that every life has significance. But as an infertile woman, I have a tendency to look back to the people who came before me instead of those, because there won't be any to follow. And I know that sounds kind of sad, probably sounds kind of sad to some, but it's really not, because I take a lot of joy in my heritage, and I have a deep, deep, deep connection to those places where my family lived. So I've kind of been hanging out in colonial America, Scotland and Ireland, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if I live long enough, we'll see stories set in Germany and England as well. You know, and I also like stories about beating the odds, and let's face it, there's no shortage of those in our history.
Is it ever tempting or easier sometimes to quote, like, live in the past, or, you know, kind of think about those things and as an escape from the present?
It is, and part of the reason why I write books is to provide that journey for people, because sometimes, you know, the world can be kind of ugly. I think we can all agree on that, and books help us escape that. They take us back to a simpler time. That being said, I think we do romanticize it a lot. I can't imagine as a woman, you know, I've been canning carrots this week, tons of carrots, and I'm wearing shorts and a t-shirt in my modern kitchen doing this, and I just cannot imagine cooking over an open fire with in this heat, with petticoats and a long, you know, a shift, and how close would you have to get to the fire, you know, to cook the food? It just must have been absolutely brutal. So I think we romanticize it quite a bit. It would have been great, and we all say, oh, I'd like to go back there, but we'd probably be there 5 minutes and just want to come back.
Yeah, we don't know the granular details like that, you know, getting smoke in your face and everything. You know, we like to think it was a simpler time, and I suppose
Well, I forget what time period it was. Medieval times. I came across this in research where they actually felt that you needed a good crust of dirt on your skin to keep the germs from getting in.
Oh.
So I'm trying to imagine how we're even here, you know, because How did love happen whenever everybody was just so filthy?
Yeah. I guess you draw a bath.
I guess.
Jeez.
Jump in the creek.
So, so since you started writing, what have you seen, like, changes wise in terms of your own writing and I guess in the larger, like, writing
Yeah.
industry?
Yeah, it's changed a lot since I started. Well, some things haven't changed. Like you still need an agent if you want to get your foot in the door of a major publisher. What has changed, however, is that it's much easier to self-publish a book. And doing so is no longer considered the kiss of death that it once was. You know, there was a time where if you self-published a book, you were shunned by agents and self-publishers. That's really not the case anymore. And in fact, there are quite a few authors which are considered hybrid at this point. And what that means is that they are able to publish independently and through a publishing company. The second thing that has really, really changed is a shift in marketing responsibilities from the publisher to the author, which is probably another reason why we're seeing an uptick in the number of self-published titles, because if you're going to spend the money and the time marketing the book, you may as well be the one to make the profits. And lastly, I would say is just the difficulty in becoming visible and staying visible. And this keeps changing. Every author has to spend at least some time and money on advertising, because you have to tickle those algorithms if you want to remain visible on Amazon. Otherwise, you're just a grain of sand. With the number of titles there are on Amazon right now, you're just a grain of sand on a beach. You could write the best book in the world and no one's going to see it, which I think is really unfortunate for authors. It's a terrible, terrible time to be a writer right now. It's difficult enough to write the book, but I feel like the harder stuff comes later whenever you've got to promote it and get it out there so people can find it. Competition is really, really fierce, and authors have had to try and get a little bit creative. A few years ago, there was a trend toward making books free on Amazon. What the idea was, the first one will be free, new readers will discover that author, and then with the hopes that they would purchase the subsequent books in a series. That was a good idea, and it does work, but I do wonder if it's leading to a culture where readers just expect all books to be free. So it's just hard, and it's changed, and it feels like things just keep changing. Just when I think I have it figured out, it changes again.
Mm-hmm. And are you able to see it all? Like, is there more people buying your books in a digital format versus a print format?
Yeah, they do. They buy, except for my local readers. My local readers want a book that they can hold and collect, and a lot, especially Scattered Seeds in a Valley Too Far, because they are historical fiction set here, so people cherish those books and they want them. But by and large, I sell way more ebooks than I do print copies.
Do you have any of your books, excuse me, do you have any of your books available as e-audio that people can listen to?
No, I don't, and I should probably look into that. My agent managed, when the contract was written up, we reserved the audiobook rights and also the movie rights. So far, Liam Neeson hasn't come calling, and I'm very disappointed about that, but time will tell. So I could do an ebook. I haven't done a whole lot of research, but I think the way it works is similar to when you want to get an agent, you have to query the audiobook artists to see. There are two ways. I think you could either pay them outright, or you can work out a deal where they'll get a percentage of the profits. And I haven't looked into it too deeply, but I'm pretty sure that's the way it goes. And I just haven't had time to look into it. I probably should, because I know a lot of people like the audiobooks.
I mean, couldn't you read it yourself, hypothetically?
I could, but you would hear chainsaws and lawnmowers and dogs barking and my husband, being Irish, swearing on occasion.
I guess you'd have to find like a soundproof room or a booth.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we have actually seen amongst trends for libraries in ours and others that the highest or the fastest growing readership is by those who listen to audiobooks, so they
Oh,
download
yeah.
it digitally. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
I think a lot of people you listen to those and listen to podcasts as a way of multitasking, while they're on a
Yeah.
walk or the treadmill or on their car ride. They're,
It makes
it's
sense. It
very
makes sense
convenient.
because we are on the go. I mean, so many of us just can't find 5 minutes to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So what future plans do you have? What's next for writing?
Well, I have 3 books rattling around in my head at this moment. Two are I've started 2 on paper. The first is a high school reunion romance featuring a wounded warrior and a woman who has spent the last 15 years caring for her terminally ill mother. So these are characters in their 40s. The second is a thriller. This is it's going to come as a shock probably to some, but it's a thriller, and it's about a busload of boarding school girls who are kidnapped and held for auction into the sex trade. And the third book is I would like to continue Katrina and Stuart's story, From a Valley Too Far. I keep getting asked, are you going to write a sequel? Are you going to write a sequel? And I think there's definitely an opportunity there. And since I have 2 books set in the same time period, I'd sort of like for Katrina and Stuart to meet up with the characters of Scattered Seeds and just see where they take us.
Now,
Yeah.
the first 2 books that you mentioned, are they contemporary time period?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know if they had high school reunions, back in the
No,
1700s.
these are both contemporaries.
I see quite a few authors writing in 2 different ways. Fiction authors, they do series
Yeah.
where they have one big one or they have a few. One of my favorite authors is Michael Connolly, and he has 3 or 4, and over time he's kind of intertwined them. And then there's other authors that just write standalone books.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on those? Do you gravitate towards one or the other, or do you see do you see readers preferring, certain ones, certain kinds?
I do think readers like series, but I think personally, if you're going to write a series, you do have to make sure that each one stands alone. I'll tell you one thing that I know for a fact infuriates readers, and that is whenever they purchase a title and it just ends at a cliffhanger. Readers want a book to resolve the plot. They want the book to be complete, and so they hate whenever these authors will publish a book and then they have to publish the next book to see what happens. Readers do not like that. I personally, my books are always going to stand alone. They may be a series with an overall character arc, but they are always going to stand alone.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn. I kind of can go between 2, but I think that's a good point you made about, cliffhangers, because for me, I feel like, hey, I accomplished something. I
Yeah.
read a book, and to have it as a cliffhanger, that I hadn't thought about that. That could be pretty frustrating, because it's like, gee, did I accomplish something? Like, what's the point?
Right. Well, it's kind of like and for a reader, it's like buying a pot without a lid. Like I paid money for this pot, but where's the lid?
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, so we were supposed to have you at the library in person, and it was like just right at the beginning of things shutting down. A lot of people were, we're not going to do something, we're not going to close. Other people were saying we're going to open, and we decided just to postpone it. And I was really looking forward to it. I'm a food person,
Me
so I
too.
was look at all this food and everything. And we've had other authors come, and it's like they show up and there's a PowerPoint and that's it, and that's fine. But I'm
Yeah.
like, we should be providing this for you, not the other way around.
No, no, I was ready. We were so ready for that. And I heard from so many people that were coming. I was actually a little worried that we weren't going to have enough room. And that's another factor that sort of played into whether or not we would cancel it, because there was just no way we were going to be able to keep away from each other. And as you mentioned, I was bringing food, and a lot of them were finger foods, cocktail meatballs and cheese ball and so forth. So it was the right decision.
So how has COVID, the pandemic, everything that is coming through this, how's this affected your writing?
Well, it's actually affected it very deeply, and in very different ways. First of all, I'm this close to being doomsday prepper. So
Oh, yeah.
I have been sort of and it's just because of the way I grew up, Vince. My parents, where we lived, we were pretty far out, and where we lived, we grew our harvest during the summer. We fished in the Coquelinas Creek. All of that was preserved, and then we would eat it during the winter. So we had an entire room that was dedicated just to canned goods. I got away from that because the Wise Market's just down the road, But what this pandemic has pointed out to me is that we are pretty close to the edge. I've been living pretty close to the edge. If all of that goes away, what would we do? So I haven't gone to extremes. I mean, I was joking when I said that I'm a doomsday prepper, but I have started canning some stuff, putting it on the shelf, and I've gone back to my roots in that regard. I've been busier than ever, and it has left little time for writing. But even if I had the time, I think I would have difficulty right now, just with the way people are at each other's throats over things. I feel that very deeply. I don't know if I have an empathic streak in me or what, but I feel that very deeply, and it makes it really hard for me to write, and I don't know, everything just has to be in place and right for me to write, and then I'll binge write, I'll go for a long time and write for days on end. But I'm having a hard time getting to that place, and a lot of it has to do with just the way we're treating each other.
Yeah. Any other final things you wanted to share with everybody about yourself, about your writing, about your doomsday prep?
Just one thing that always comes up when I give presentations is that, and I start talking to people, is that there are a lot of people out there who want to write a book. I would just encourage everybody to do that. And in our area, we're very fortunate. We have some really good writers right in our immediate area. Carrie Jacobs is another local author who's really good. Wayne Taylor, his books are wildly popular in our area. And they say everyone has a book in them, at least one book in them. And I believe that's true. It's just a matter of taking the time and sitting down and doing it. And I would just encourage anyone who has just the slightest desire to write, do it. You don't have to sell it if you don't want to. Do it. And I guess if I can help in any way, I'm here. Just reach out to me. I think I'm a fairly friendly person. So if I can help in any way, just reach out to me, and I'll be happy to do what I can.
All right, I'll get you out of here on this one. What are you reading these days?
Oh my gosh. Well, first, let me ask you one. Did you read a lot during the pandemic? Did you read a lot, or were you pretty busy?
I didn't read as much as I probably could have, but I read some. I'm a big podcast person and sports podcasts, and there's no sports, so there was no podcast really. So
you had to do something.
I turned to books and some magazines. Yeah.
I did too during the pandemic, and I think I've read more now than I have any point in my life. Simply, as we discussed earlier, it's an escape, and because the world can be so ugly, I wanted to escape. And so I read a lot, and I couldn't, there'd be too many titles to list, but one book that I really read, that I really enjoyed recently was The Bend in Redwood Road, and I can't remember the name of the author. But it's a story about a woman who figures out through an ancestry test that she's adopted. And it's the meeting of the biological mother and the biological child, which I thought was really good. I read the New Testament beginning to end.
Which translation?
What's ESV stand for?
English Standard Version?
Yeah, and I don't know if that's a good one or not. People will tell me, I am sure. But I also am reading The Mask of Duplicity. I think that one's by Julia Brannon. Lots of historical fiction. Really good stuff. All of them were really good. I don't think I read a bad book the whole time.
Very good. Well, Julie, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank
This
you.
has been fun, and I've learned a lot just from listening to you talk. So, yeah.
Great. And are we going to try and do a good giveaway, or?
Yeah, let's do a giveaway. So we're going to share this whole thing on Instagram and Facebook, and yeah, let's see, we could do it with shares. I guess
We'll figure out the details. Maybe put them in the comments.
Sure. Yeah, we'll post about that. So make sure you definitely comment and share this. Like it. Really, really like it. And yeah, so again, Julie, thank you so much. We really appreciate having a great local author. I appreciate seeing, everything that you're doing. So.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.